Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eva Pruneda. I'm the coordinator of the Catalan National Assembly in Brussels, and I welcome you to this event. We have been showing for 20 days the exhibition of the Spanish artist Santiago Sierra, Political Prisoners in Contemporary Spain, in the Espace Multicultural FZOVL. Our aim is to show how democratic deficits in a member state of the European Union, like Spain, threaten the fundamental rights of all citizens in Europe. You start turning a blind eye in Spain, and you cannot defend the values of democracy anywhere else. Indeed, Mr. Orban, the president of Hungary, is starting to defend his authoritarian policy by questioning the acts of Spain against its minorities and dissidents. I hope that this exhibition was interesting and enriching for those who visited it. If you think that we could show it elsewhere in Belgium, please contact us. You will find our contact data in the description of the event. This finissage takes place exactly 3 years after the 1st of October's self-determination referendum in Catalonia. As we could not make a big event with presential public, we thought it would be a nice idea to give voice to somebody who was living those facts with special intensity and who is still suffering today the consequences of the repression that was triggered on those days. Therefore, we have asked Mrs. Marta Torrecillas and her lawyer to join us this evening to tell us about their repressive experience as anonymous people engaged in the Catalan independence movement. As a way of introduction, we will show a small video explaining the main facts. Some of the next images show scenes of police violence that might be shocking if you are very sensitive. The video lasts 2 minutes and 20 seconds, after which we will join our guests in the teleconference room. Special thanks to our colleague of ANC Netherlands, Núria Barceló, for moderating the interview. The event will be with professional simultaneous interpreting from Catalan into English. Thank you very much for your attention.
De una chica que salió con el brazo izquierdo enyesado o vendado, mejor dicho, y donde explicaba dramáticamente que un policía le había estado rompiendo los dedos de la mano uno a uno. Vimos que el brazo vendado era el izquierdo y la mano que teóricamente el policía la estiraba para desalojarla era la otra mano, no?
És que és molt ridícul. S'agafen a que el policia m'agafa la mà dreta dalt a l'escala i jo surto amb la mà esquerra embenada. Per què? Perquè no es paren a mirar al mig de l'escala, que és que hi ha imatges, però clar, aquests no els mirarem, que es veu com em fan mal a l'esquerra.
Finalmente esta misma chica confesó públicamente que no era verdad, que había mentido.
Jo tenia la sensació i el mal de que m'havien trencat. I a més, com que el de l'ambulància també m'ho va dir, en aquell moment jo anava dient trencat els dits. El metge em fa que li expliqui què havia passat i llavors em fan les radiografies, em diu que no tinc cap os trencal, diu, i m'ho explica, és la càpsula de dintre, que es trenquen unes fibres que hi ha a dintre i diu, però fa molt mal. Diu, és com si tens el mateix mal com si t'haguessin trencat.
Hay un informe médico de la señora Marta Torrecillas con una lesión traumática en la mano izquierda, en las articulaciones interfalángicas segunda, tercera y cuarta, que consta investigada en el juzgado de instrucción número 7 y por el que hay imputados varios agentes de los cuerpos de policía.
Sí.
Por lo tanto, ¿no será que era cierto que esa señora fue lesionada en la intervención policial?
Bueno, vamos a ver.
Insults, humiliacions, incloure en grups de WhatsApp, amenaces de mort, amenaces de tot tipus, atacar la meva persona directament per aquesta suposada mentida que diuen que vaig dir. Vaig perdre la feina. Jo vaig presentar una querella a la Policia Nacional, els dos policies, el que em tira per les escales més el que l'ajuda, i a part hi ha una investigació oberta per tota aquesta escretx que se m'ha fet. Quan la Fiscalia va rebre la meva querella, la seva idea era imputar-me. Llavors em volien imputar per calúmnies contra la policia i per diversos fets que vaig oposar resistència, etc. I llavors el que va fer el jutge és que va dir que no acceptava aquesta imputació i es va quedar.
Good evening. Today or tonight, we'll be interviewing Marta Torrecillas and Xavier, who is a lawyer from Alerta Solidària. He's going to then tell us about the general case that's been opened against the Catalan independence protesters. So I'd like to welcome Marta and Xavi. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Marta, I'd like to ask you some questions. Hello. Thanks for inviting us to come along and take part in this event. And I'd like to thank everybody who's out there listening to us and learning about the situation here in Catalonia and this repression that we're suffering, and for standing by our exiled companions who are going through this entirely complicated process we're living through. So I'd like to understand a little bit about your situation. Can you tell us briefly, Marta, what happened to you on the 1st of October and what injuries the police caused you? Yes, on the 1st of October, I was at the Pau Clares school. That night before, we'd had a very festive experience protecting the schools. We shared a lot of nice experiences together. And in the morning, when the ballot boxes arrived, we heard that the police were going to be coming, and we needed to get organized in a peaceful way so that we could protect the entrance to the school, which was the polling station, to protect the ballot boxes and to exercise our right to vote. Now, there was a staircase going up to the school, and we all sat down on the stairs and we were shouting, we're peaceful people, we come in peace, and non-violent resistance is our keyword. But the police started pushing people apart until they came to the stairs. You'll have seen they were kicking people, they were throwing people down the stairs. When they got to the top of the steps, we tried to protect the old people who were there and people who were the most vulnerable. And we moved them to one side and protected them. Now, 2 police officers grabbed me and they threw me down the steps. They injured my hand. They broke the capsules of my fingers. They said it was capsulitis, but actually it's not. They broke the fibers in my fingers and they dragged me out of the school. They were also groping my breasts. It was, yeah, you can imagine what it was like. You've seen the images, I think, from the documentary, on the video. And what happened next? So that all of a sudden you were being attacked on social media. There was a harassment going on. What was that all about? Well, when I spoke out about having been injured by the police, I was in the ambulance. The ambulance said, possibly you've got broken fingers. They certainly hurt a lot. And I spoke to the press. I said that the police had broken my fingers. I was in a state of shock at the time. I wasn't really myself. I'd just been through that very terrible experience. And then the press at the time, they spoke to me in situ. And then I went on public TV the next day, Catalan TV, that is. I'd been to the hospital meanwhile, after voting. And then I said in the studios that I hadn't actually had my fingers broken, but I had been injured. And then the Spanish national press and TV, the only thing they want to do is just cover up all the awful things that were done that day. They decided to start mobbing me, lynching me on social media. Someone who's very well known in Madrid and has a lot of influence over this gutter press, put my details on a forum called Foro Coches on the internet, and the people on that forum, just every day, people started calling me, sending me messages, calling me up on the phone, threatening me. And while I was getting all that on my mobile phone, I was seeing that the press was saying, this is all fake news, she's making it up. Basically, they were trying to deny the fact that anything bad had happened to me, and that I'd said that I'd had my fingers broken, then it wasn't true. They said, well, okay, that proves the police did nothing. They didn't hurt anybody, they didn't do anything wrong, and we were blowing it all out of all proportion. So you're not just talking about individuals. Are you talking about actual media and press that were generally considered to be serious press that were involved in this? But did they talk to you beforehand? Did they do any fact checks, or did they just base themselves on rumors? No, they'd seen the manipulated videos on the internet. They said that it was one hand, and then I'd changed my mind and said it was the other hand. You can see perfectly what happened on the videos. They said that it was all manipulated, it was fake news. And rather than just fact checking, they just made stuff up. They've got to invent some kind of a narrative to make people believe that what we were saying was all lies, was fake news, and that Spain was right, Catalonia was wrong, we shouldn't have done this, and we were making it up. What they basically wanted to protect the police. And, you know, we were saying bad things about the police, they weren't having it. And of course, the politicians in the Spanish parliament said I was a false witness, said I was lying, and that was an example. And there were 3 or 4 people that had been injured. I mean, more than 1,000 people were injured that day. So you're saying that really just the fact that you had said you'd had your fingers broken by the police, but it was capsulitis. This difference of criteria is something they've exploited to justify that all the images of violence that day on the 1st of October, is that what they were saying? That meant that nothing was true? Yeah, it was all very media centered. We had these 3 elements, what had just happened, and the protagonist, and the story. And of course, the media love that. For example, there's an old woman, she was bleeding down her face. You know, she'd been struck on the head, and they said, no, that was just paint. Someone's put paint on her. And Mr. Espanyol, who lost an eye because of a rubber bullet, which are illegal in Catalonia. They said that he was provoking and he had a knife and was threatening the police. So everything was our fault. That was basically it. Yes, of course, we put up resistance, but it was peaceful resistance. We had our hands in the air. We were singing. There were children. There were old people, families. We weren't some kind of a violent mob just trying to cause violence. So, of course, that's the narrative. That's the narrative that they sold to the people, they sold to the media, that we were there lying and provoking. And how have you faced up to these attacks, both on a judicial level and also emotionally? I mean, how have you been coping with all this? Well, from a judicial point of view, I met Xavi Monge, the lawyer. I turned up at his office through the friends from the CUP political party. They said there's Alerta Solidària, this a wonderful organization that provides legal aid. And he received me, and I felt very, very at ease because I knew that someone was standing up for my rights. It was good. They were so aware of all the legal ins and outs. That helped me to feel a lot calmer emotionally, because a lot of questions, you know, I have pushed this really to one side because it's quite painful. From an emotional point of view, it's changed my life. I've changed as a person. A lot of things have changed from the point of view, just tiny things that, you know, you've had your phone number all your life, ever since you've had a mobile phone as a teenager. You have to change that because you can't use the same phone. I had to keep changing my hairstyle so people wouldn't recognize me in the street. Things have calmed down now, but that was the first kind of thing that I had to do. It was awful. Emotionally, it's terrible. It's like a kick in the stomach. You know, it's something that you carry around as baggage. Some people can handle it better than others. And I've been to therapy, counseling. I've had a lot of help from my boyfriend, from my family. Everyone stood by me. But I haven't stopped living my life. I haven't stopped going to demos. I haven't stopped going out and calling for all these things that we want. And we've set up a platform today for all the people affected by the 1st of October events, the police violence, and then all the judiciary attacks. And we're standing by, and it's really very helpful to have everybody standing with you. I've moved out of Barcelona. I've changed my lifestyle. I've got more time for myself. I'm spending more time with my family. But of course, there are all sorts of after effects that you suffer. I've got nervous effects. I've got physical effects. Some will pass. Some I'll probably carry with me for a long time. Yeah, well, we'll be talking to Xavi a bit later as the lawyer, because your case is certainly not an isolated case here. And we've set up this platform for the victims of the 1st of October. There are a lot of similar cases out there. A lot of people in similar situations to yours, I guess. Yes, certainly. There's a lot of people that have been silenced. I say silenced because the repression they've suffered, my example is a case. They weren't coming to attack Marta specifically. There was a general violence against the whole independence cause, the people who are in exile, in jail. Tamara, who has been under house arrest. Adria is in exile. All these cases, and my case, this lynching and mobbing by the media, basically the effect that they want is to scare us into just not doing any of this. When they caught all the CDRs, the people from the committees to defend the Republic, and they locked them up, you know, they have created a false narrative here, and this is falling down before our eyes, but that's the situation. Well, we saw when there was the trial for the politicians and the two Jordis, all the things that were made up, the blatant lies that were spouted during the case, the judges just believed all that. So the people that were harassing you, do you think that the judicial system will ever prove you right and go after these people who were lynching you or mobbing you? Well, that's a good question, because it's justice 1, Catalonia 0 right now. Everything is being manipulated. There is no real justice. They're all in the hands of big business and the economic and political will for Spain to carry on business as usual. They don't want to change anything. It is true that the judge that has taken on the case of these 4 people accused of launching this hate campaign against me, the judge has taken this case on board and is investigating it properly. But the judge is just one part of the whole scene and the whole setup. And there's the prosecutor's office, there's the defense, they'll invent all sorts of things, and I'm sure they will get off scot-free. They'll say, oh, it's just 4 kids who sent out a few WhatsApp messages, what the hell? And maybe Xavi will correct me on that, but that's how I see it. I don't know if anyone has any questions they'd like to put to us from the room. We've got our correspondent in the room who's fielding questions. Well, Marta has to leave us at 8 o'clock, so if there are no questions, if there are questions, I'll answer them now, but if not, I'll have to scoot off. Okay, well, Marta, it seems there are no questions from the public. Thank you very, very much for coming along and sharing your experience with us today. It's good for us to understand exactly how things went and what situation you're currently in, just because you wanted to defend the 1st of October. Thank you. Well, thank you to you, and keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Xavier, for connecting and giving us a voice for all of those that are suffering repression around the country. Okay, Xavier, can I turn to you now? Because you want to tell us about the judicial side of things. Can you hear us okay? Yeah, I can hear you fine. As Marta has said, you know a lot more about the whole judicial side of things than any of the rest of us as the lawyer. Can you give us a timeline of repression and the situation of the 4 people in front of the judge? Well, there are 2 procedures, so Marta. One is against the police officers that actually attacked her. We were able to identify some of them, particularly the one that actually injured her fingers and threw her down the stairs. We know who they are, but we're still in the investigation phase and pending a trial. And the other person, well, it concerns all of the mobbing that she suffered after the events of the 1st of October that we've just heard about. Now, according to the procedure, there are various investigations underway. One focuses on who actually published her public, private, personal data on the internet, particularly on that forum, which is a forum supposedly about cars, but actually it's a nest of all sorts of horrible people from the far right.
So we need to identify who published her data. And also we managed to identify some of the people who, through WhatsApp messages and texts, harassed her and insulted her. So based on the thousands of calls and messages that she received, because we're talking about thousands of messages in just a month and a half, so much so that, as she already told you, she had to change her phone number because it was not easy to endure. 4 of them, and I must also say that one of them is a civil guard officer. It's a national police force that has to answer to the Spanish army, so it belongs to the army. So these 4 people are going to be tried in court because of a hate crime and also because of the threats to her. Now, this has already made a lot of headway, and I could say that the only thing that's pending is for an official date to be known. So we're just waiting for that to happen. Okay, so in order to understand what the current situation is, from your point of view, and especially from a legal point of view, can you give us a timeline of repression that has been suffered in Catalonia, but also outside of Catalonia in the past few years? All of this repression was meant to stop October the 1st referendum from happening. Now, in order to understand what happened and also the repression that took place before and after, I think we need some historical background about the history of repression in the Spanish state. Obviously, I'll speed through this because we don't have time to go over the whole thing, but it is important to remember that unlike what happens in many other countries that have had experienced dictatorships such as Portugal, Germany, or Italy, in Spain, however, the dictatorship was not overthrown. The dictator, Franco, died in his bed when he was old. Also, it was the military as well as the Falange, which was the single party under Franco, as well as King Juan Carlos himself, who is now hidden, who has fled to the United Arab Emirates, whom Franco had appointed, by the way, who led, but above all conditioned and imposed the so-called transition to democracy. This meant that power structures in Spain did not make a clean break, unlike what happened in other countries. They themselves continued to control the regime, the political system, and they remained in key positions in the states. That is the government, large corporations, as well as the judiciary. In fact, it has been said on many occasions that the Spanish transition to democracy was peaceful and exemplary, which is just a myth. It's an out-and-out lie. Ever since Franco died in 1975, all the way to 1982, which is when the Socialist Party won the elections for the first time, about 600 people, were killed by members of the police, the army, as well as far-right paramilitary groups that were linked to the Franco regime. So these obviously conditioned the democratic transition, and that's why they remained in power. If we make a quick leap in time and come closer to the present, we must understand that there's a very important moment in Spanish politics, which is that for decades, there had been a limiting factor in Spanish politics, which was the existence of armed groups. Here, especially ETA, that's the one that had committed more and more terrorist attacks, and for the longest time, which served to the Spanish state as a justification for tightening criminal law. Now, we're talking about rules that were passed against a specific backdrop when they were trying to crack down on terrorism and these specific armed groups. But then these rules have been used far beyond what was known as this fight. For instance, prisoners have been scattered across different prisons. In our case, Catalan political prisoners have managed to come to Catalan prisons, but for a very long time, they were jailed in Madrid. This is important because in 2011, so 9 years ago, ETA announced a final ceasefire and has remained inactive ever since. 2 years ago, in 2018, they announced their dissolution and disarmament. Why am I telling you this? Well, I'm telling you this because the most logical thing would be that in a country where organized armed organizations and political violence had vanished, in a country in which this doesn't exist anymore, those rules that were meant for political dissent, in theory, should have loosened, right? Or disappeared altogether, because that internal enemy was no longer there to fight. However, in Spain, the opposite is true, because something else happened in Spain that was quite important, which was the economic crisis that started in 2008 all over the globe. Back then, many protest movements arose. There were a lot of general strikes and much confrontation in the streets. We had the Indignados anti-austerity movement, March the 15th movement, protests on public squares. And with such social unrest in the streets, the government of Mariano Rajoy, of the People's Party, adopted back in 2015. So for 4 years, or for several years, ETA was no longer in existence. And the Spanish government adopted a set of several reforms of the criminal code and the so-called gag law, which greatly increased the sentences and the type of behaviors that could be punished regarding protests. So hanging banners on buildings, now this is a crime and it wasn't, or much harsher sentences for public unrest, or other kind of misdemeanors or crimes committed during a demonstration. Now, these against this context of growing repression, we can see an increase in pro-independence Catalan movement, and there was an announcement that this self-determination referendum was going to be held in Catalonia. So that was quite an explosion for the Spanish government, despite the fact that the government, the parliament, and the pro-independence movements had tried to come to an agreement with the Spanish government about that referendum on many occasions. They even went to the Spanish Congress in the parliament in Madrid to ask for that referendum, but it had proved impossible. They wouldn't hear of it. Finally, in September 2017, early September that year, the Parliament of Catalonia passed the laws to be able to hold the referendum. It is very important to remember that because she allowed MPs to debate and to vote on these laws based on a majority of MPs, the Speaker of Parliament, Carme Forcadell, was remanded in custody in pre-trial detention in 2018 and is currently serving an 11.5-year prison sentence. So there's been a lot of solidarity coming from other parliaments in Europe, because obviously just because she allowed this debate to happen and this vote to happen, this person has been convicted to 11.5 years in prison. And after that, the Spanish police, the CNI, the Secret Services, but also the prosecutor's office, the courts, the state as a whole, were fully invested in preventing the referendum from happening. Ballot boxes or ballot papers were never found. Thousands of people managed to hide ballot boxes and ballots at home. And thanks to those people, on October the 1st, there were about 3,000 polling stations that had boxes and ballots. So the Spanish police, intelligence services, they didn't manage to find even a single one of them. So in this investigation, trying to find those materials and prevent the referendum from happening, there's another key date, which is September the 20th. I'm sure that if you've watched the documentary before, or maybe you know about this, that was a day in which the Civil Guard, the Spanish Guardia Civil, that police force that is part of the Spanish army, as I was saying, carried out searches in several buildings, mostly official buildings, as well as several company headquarters. Some of the most salient ones or significant ones were the headquarters of Department of the Catalan government, and particularly the Vice Presidency of Economy. So the Civil Guard and the Prosecutor's Office were obsessed that they thought that from that presidency, the Vice Presidency of Economy, that's where they were organizing the referendum. On that day, the Civil Guard officers arrested several top leaders of the government, of the Catalan government. And spontaneously, using social media, there were tens of thousands of people who immediately took to the streets. And this was said already, some people were hearing about this over the radio, and they just took to the streets and went to the buildings that were being searched. And then little by little, everyone gathered at the headquarters of the Vice Presidency of Economy until well into the night. That day, the president of two major pro-independence organizations, the National Assembly, ANC, which is inviting us to this event today, and Òmnium Cultural, Jordi Sánchez and Jordi Cuixart, made sure that the rally was peaceful at all times. They acted as mediators with the Civil Guard and with Mossos d'Esquadra, the Catalan police force. And in fact, after dark, they tried to call off the rally by telling people to go home. But in order to do that, so that they could be heard, they climbed onto a Civil Guard car with a megaphone in order to tell people, we will vote, just go home. And despite the fact that they behaved perfectly well, they were an example for everybody, the Spanish Supreme Court sentenced both of them. They did not hold any position in government, any political office, and still they were sentenced to 9 years in prison. And just one last thing about what happened that day, which is quite significant. the national Spanish police, which is another police force and that answers to the government of Madrid, tried to storm the headquarters of the CUP, the CUP, without a court order, by force. The CUP is the party of the pro-independence left that had proposed a referendum to the government. But thousands of people arrived there and stopped them. So it is hard to believe that in the 21st century, in a European country, the police, without any kind of a court order or decision, tried to attack the headquarters of a political party that is legal. And they were hooted as well. So I just wanted to mention this so that you understand what happened on October the 1st, but also the historical background of why this happened, because of this anti-democratic nature of the Spanish government and not having made a clean slate after the dictatorship. Well, I think that Marta is not the only person that you are defending at Alerta Solidària. Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of people do you work with and who have been the target of the Spanish system and justice on October the 1st and later on, so that they could avoid something similar from happening again? Yes, we need to understand that there are still ongoing cases about the people who organized October the 1st referendum. So very quickly, last year, which is when the main trial against the Catalan government and the Speaker of Parliament and the two social activist leaders, Jordi Sánchez and Jordi Cuixart, happened. As I said, they received very long sentences. And in fact, Oriol Junqueras, who was the vice president of the government, was sentenced to 13 years in prison. And the rest who held public positions between 10 and 12 years each, except for the three that had left their post by then. We're talking about very harsh sentences for having organized a referendum where the only violence that people witnessed was the one exerted by the police officers against lay people, lay citizens who had decided to go there to cast their vote or to defend the polling stations. This year, we saw the trial against the top officials of the regional police as well, both politicians as well as police leaders, and the court ruling is pending, but sentences could be up to 11 years in prison. Now,
We had the members, the independence members of the Parliament, Mireia Boy, who's representing the CUP in Parliament, and the cases against the four members of the government that went into exile. Puigdemont, Comín, Puig and Ponsatí are their names, and Marta Rovira from Esquerra Republicana and Ana Gabriel from the CUP, who are in exile in Switzerland. Those cases are still open. Now, in the coming months, a macro trial, a huge trial, will also be held against senior officials of the Catalan government, the Generalitat, and several companies who are all accused of organizing the referendum and have had to put up nearly 6 million euros to stop their properties being seized. We're talking about more than 30 people. The elected members from the Vice Presidency of the Economy that we mentioned before, the Director of Public Television, Catalan Public Broadcaster, for broadcasting referendum and advertisement, or members of several courier companies who sent material. These are the most or the best well-known ones because they're directly connected to the referendum, but there are hundreds or possibly thousands of others involved. I think today there are about 2,850 people who are pending trial, or they have procedures open against them for events related to the independence drive and the 1st of October referendum. They're basically people who have spoken out or been out on the two general strikes that took place right after the referendum. Demonstrators, which were massive demonstrations and strikes considering the brutal police violence that was exerted on the 1st of October 2017. but a huge number of people who were arrested in October last year. Process against the ruling condemning the government and the social leaders, which again were massive. There was a lot of confrontation. There was a huge level of repression by the police. People responded to that violence. And there were many, many days of riots and standoffs in the streets. So hundreds of people were arrested then, a year ago. More than 30 protesters, mostly very young people, 18, 20, 22-year-olds, students and so on, spent months in pre-trial detention. Many have reported physical and verbal abuse and attacks during the arrests by the police. And some of those cases are quite serious. We're talking about people who are underage who suffered aggression inside the police station. And finally, we should maybe highlight a few specific cases that Marta touched upon before. Tamara and Adri, two members of the Committees for the Defense of the Republic, the CDRs. If you don't know what they are, they're popular people's assemblies from towns and districts, and they've been accused of terrorism. I don't know if it was last week or this week, Tamara was tried for a misdemeanor, supposedly for terrorism. She's been in solitary confinement. And they want to send her to prison for 7 months. And Adri, who's still in exile because he's still pending the arrest warrant. Of course, he doesn't want to be thrown into jail in Spain because he knows he won't have a fair trial. And the other are the people who were arrested, the detainees of 23rd of September 2019, accused of belonging to a terrorist organization and holding explosives, which is crazy because nobody knows any terrorist organizations here. There have been no terrorist attacks here. Nobody has claimed, any of these attacks. We don't even know whether jihadist attacks. I mean, nobody has said, we are behind this. So I don't know what terrorist organizations they think they're talking about, but they had a search and they didn't find any explosives either. So to date, we don't know exactly what these accusations of terrorism are really based upon. But 7 of these people spent more than 3 months behind bars, and some were in solitary confinement, which is a method considered to be torture, which means spending more than 22 hours a day without leaving your cell alone. It's a 2 meter by 2 meter cell, and 6 more that have not been in prison, but they're still waiting to know whether they will be tried. So as I said at the start, these laws that were made under the pretext or in the context of terrorism now are being applied to people who have nothing to do with terrorism, who are simply protesting. There are people who have been taking part in marches, strikes, cutting off, sit-ins in the middle of the motorway, the kind of thing which is considered normal in many other countries. Another question to you, Xavi, all these cases, if the judge is to investigate somebody's house and send the police, that has to be based on facts. How have they constructed this narrative of most of these open cases, even when they've been into people's houses and found nothing? How are they justifying these pre-trial detentions of 3 months and then putting people behind bars? I mean, surely the law must be able to do something about that. Well, let me put this into context here. These are based on reports written by the police forces. In Catalonia, we have our own police force, the Mossos d'Esquadra, police force that depends on the regional government and answers to the regional government, and theoretically is also pro-independence, like the politicians who were their overlords, but they've continued to repress many pro-independence activists. Moreover, since the referendum of 2017, the Spanish government has greatly increased its its riot squads and information squads in Catalonia, both at national police and civil guard level, many of them specializing in spying on people and infiltrating different groups. Now, normally, we've got two types of cases. Those that involve selective arrests or detentions, and those which happen at the time in the thick of a march, for example, or a demo. Now, some of these reports or these police operations that lead to arrest, for example, the 23rd of September last year, they build this up by phone wiretaps, infiltrating groups, and usually there's a mixture of actual facts, some of them real, somebody does belong to the CDR groups in their town or a part of this particular demo or protest, or they've taken part in protest, which is neither illegal nor secret. They're just things that people can do. They don't need to hide their identity if they go on a march. But then they add all sorts of unrelated facts, sometimes completely fabricated, something that's happened nearby, or something they simply made up, and a big dose of their own imagination too. They envisage all sorts of hidden agendas. Oh, they were holding that meeting, but actually what they were doing was planning an attack on some building. But there is no proof to underlie that. It's just the police imagine that maybe that will fly. And so they've got people they think that might be about to commit a crime. They think there's got some, using some secret languages. It's as if they're taking things straight out of a spy novel. And as concerns detainees at specific marches, in most cases, the reports were made by police officers and only based on the police reports. This officer and this officer said that they saw someone throwing a stone, burning a rubbish bin, breaking a window, whatever. And sometimes there are photos or videos. You can't really see very well, they're blurry, you can't identify who's who. And they say, no, this is the person that's got their black hood on is definitely the person that we've arrested. And sometimes, quite simply, they don't even have that. The police just says, no, I saw this guy throw a stone and I arrested him. And that's all the proof that they have. So you depend on the judge believing the police's version or the version of the actual defendant. There are all sorts of cases. I could talk about this for hours, but we don't have much time. But in the October protest last year, sharing the reports among several lawyers, we were helping people during one particular night of protest. We realized that that several people were accused of throwing stones. And as proof, they had brought along the stones concerned. And we realized that some of these stones, it was the same stone that they'd photographed and appeared in different reports. It was the same stone. It was obvious. Obviously, someone could only have thrown that stone once, physically thrown it. So it's virtually impossible that that same stone could have been thrown lots of times in the same standoffs with the police. But that being so, the police attributed the same stone to a whole group of people. We even had one case in which one of these arrested people turned up at the courthouse, and the report said, "We don't know what he did." Okay, so you've arrested him, you've taken him to the police station, you've had him 2 days in the cells, and then the people say, yeah, well, we don't actually know what you've done. So my question is this then, in these cases when there's no exact proof or no proof at all, can the judge decide to condemn someone just because the police has given their version? Is that enough? Yeah, that's enough. It's also true the way that the judge ascertains the different items of evidence is totally up to their criterion. They hear the declarations from everyone, from the defense witnesses, the police officers concerned. If the judge considers that the police officer's version is credible, you know, I mean, you can say, well, they might say, well, the police officer doesn't know this person, there's no reason to make things up. And that way, they sort of ignore the fact that the police forces also have their own ideology. And they're usually very much in line with the far right, Spain First groups. To be impartial to somebody, you know, impartiality from somebody who is aligned with far right groups, when the people who are being accused are Catalan separatists, then, you know, their word is enough to actually send someone behind bars.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that this interview helps to understand a bit better some clues that are not usually explained in the media coverage outside Catalonia. The Catalan National Assembly has many external working groups abroad that would be delighted to bring you in contact with this hidden side of our story. You can contact us by email or our social media. If you are interested in showing the exhibition of Santiago Sierra in your town or country, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for your attention.